A couple of the settings, make sure everything's working. It's complicated, so I am going to see if I can get that happening here. No, Facebook. That's interesting. Let me check YouTube. Okay. Yeah, YouTube is working. Okay. I don't know what happened to Facebook today. But pardon me while I get things going here so that more people can check us out. Facebook today. I don't know where YouTube is. My apologies to my friends on YouTube, on Facebook, but what are you going to do? It's an imperfect world. I'll put the show on Facebook later. I don't know. Not on Facebook today. Okay, well, here we go. I'm Brett Premack, Jazz Video Guy Live. I am broadcasting from, as you can see in the background here, Tucson, Arizona. It's a beautiful day here in Tucson. Beautiful day on planet Earth, depending on your perspective, how things are going. This has been a very weird period here. Video Guy Live. I don't know what happened there. This has been a very weird period. Well, there's the virus, and also we are in something called Mercury in Retrograde. I don't know if many people know what Mercury in Retrograde is. It happens, I guess, 3 times a year for 12 to 14 days, and it has to do with the alignment of the planets. Now, there are some people who are somewhat skeptical about astrology and whether or not how the planets are aligned might affect our lives. I personally believe in astrology, not the horoscopes you get in the newspaper, but the actual way the planets are and how you are part of that. Your reaction to that based on when you came into this world. But several times a year, this thing called Mercury in Retrograde happens. And strange things usually happen. There's all kinds of problems, communication problems. Hello from France. Hello, Fred from France. Yes, Henri, I am way out west. So this communications thing affects us in different ways, and it's affected me from guests on the show. I was supposed to have a guest today. I was supposed to have a guest last Wednesday. That got messed up. I'll talk about that. I've recently had some health issues and had to navigate them through the health crisis. Our planet is also into some weird stuff. We'll talk about that, but I'm going to play mostly music today. I'm going to talk about some of the musicians that I know and love by playing some rare video. So let me start out here. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I guarantee this is probably something you have never seen before.
In this tune, we feature no one in particular.
Yeah, from 1972. Kind of a easygoing jam session of sorts. Interesting personnel for sure. I mean, Art Blakey and Tony Williams. That could have been some explosive percussion, but they were just kind of going with the flow there. Stanley Clarke on bass. That's when Stanley was really beginning to gain a reputation from his work with Pharoah Sanders, and that's when Chick Corea and Return to Forever was happening. Yeah. And George Cable's on piano. George is still with us. He's been a sideman, a great composer, done some nice trio work. And the flautist, Jeremy Stig, playing in a Rassan Roland Kirk, kind of singing along with his playing. Mr. Stig was a rather audacious flute player who arrived in the mid-60s with an album that turned a lot of heads called Flute Fever that featured Denny Zeitlin on piano. Was it Buster Williams on bass and Ben Riley on drums? It was an incredible album. I mean, it was re-released a few years ago on Sunnyside. And around that time, in the late 60s, he had a group called Jeremy and the Satyrs. You know, there was a lot of what was early fusion music happening. And Jeremy Stig had this group with Eddie Gomez on bass, Warren Bernhardt on piano. I forget the other cats, but they were kind of feeling their way, which in a way this track reminded me of Feeling My Way. But certainly one of our dedicated viewers, listeners, Henri from Paris, was actually at this concert in Paris in 1972. Hello, Rome. We got a couple of Rome people here. One of our friends from Rome, Fred, writes, obviously he, Henri, has time to go to jazz concerts. He is an aristocrat. Signed, Le Bousse, a French joke. Boy, I don't know. I think you have to read in between the lines there. Anyway, feel lucky to have been back there back then. And one of the bands that I was listening to in the late 60s, I first caught them on recordings in 66 and then live in 67, the Charles Lloyd Quartet. Portugal, 1966. That's the new Charles Lloyd Quartet, the group that recorded at the Monterey Jazz Festival. Forest Flower. That was huge, that record. Put my other glass. I got so many glasses. It's unbelievable. Much better. Keith Jarrett, 21 years old. 21 years old at the time of this recording. Now, that group shot to fame. That group, the Charles Lloyd Quartet, the mid-'60s, moving into the late 60s, became a global phenomena because they played at venues outside of traditional jazz clubs. They played at the Fillmore East and the Fillmore West, alongside the Grateful Dead. And the music that Charles Lloyd was playing at that time was a modal music. It was melody too as well, but still, there were long vamps, things that were easy for new listeners to get into. And Charles Lloyd was hugely popular during that period. I saw him a number of times, always with Keith Jarrett. Keith Jarrett just got better and better. And they split, I guess in '69, the original quartet broke up. Cecil McBee left and Ron McCuller played bass for a while. And then, I don't know, bands don't stay together. The Beatles didn't stay together. But, Carl, you have a nice anecdote? Well, now's the time. So Charles Lloyd is still doing what he did. He's played in a number of different ensembles since then. Keith Jarrett, though, that was kind of a jumping off point for him because right after Charles Lloyd, he went with Miles. That was the band with Gary Bartz and Jack DeJohnette, who also crossed over from Charles Lloyd. And then Keith started to do the solo piano thing, and then the classic quartet with Dewey Redman, and he took off. Unfortunately, Keith has not been playing much the past few years. He's had some health issues. From what I understand, nothing life-threatening, but the work that he did for all those years and traveling took its toll on him. Thankfully, we have a lot of video to dig of Keith Jarrett and Charles Lloyd. Let's look at another video here. Wow, Freddie Hubbard and our friend Benny Green, who was with us last week. Louis Hayes on drums. I didn't catch the bassist there. But Freddie Hubbard always sounds good. Always. Before I get into one of my rants here, I have a few things to say today. I'm going to play one more piece of music, and then I'll start my intense rap. Montgomery, 1965 in London. We recognize Stan Tracy on piano, Jackie Dolan on drums. I'm not sure of the bass player. Oh, Rick Laird, I'm sorry. In fact, that's part of the rhythm section for the infamous Sonny Rollins live at Ronnie Scott's session. Sonny had a sabbatical there. It was either 65 or 66. He used that rhythm section. They taped it. That's an incredible recording. And of course, Wes Montgomery. Wes Montgomery left us when he was 45 years old. Clifford Brown left us when he was 27. Charlie Parker left us when he was 35. Michael Brecker left us when he was 58. Life is rather unpredictable and not terribly fair. It's nice to have this music and these creators, but no rhyme or reason to this sometimes. Certainly lately, even more so from my perspective. The unexpected is what gets you in this life. 6 months ago, no COVID-19. That's turned everything around completely. Always talk about the superbug, the super virus, the unleashing of these things based on global warming and the fact that people travel all around the world, things can be spread, but it hits at a bad time, a hard time. A lot of people suffering. Bad situation in the United States. I, unfortunately, had to go to the hospital last week for some elective surgery. Not life-threatening, but something that I need to have done. I had put off. In fact, elective surgery was canceled here in Arizona in March because of the virus. But that ended. I got this in, and I didn't want to do it at this time, but I knew that I didn't know what was going to happen in the future. And also, I didn't want to do it during Mercury in retrograde, because that's when crazy, unexpected things happen. And I went to the hospital, did the procedure last week. I actually had the surgery on Thursday. Here it is Monday. Still in some discomfort. I will recover when they go into your body like that. Pretty wild stuff. What's really wild is when you go under, when you get anesthesia. There's always that possibility. You're not going to wake up. I mean, in some ways, is that like a rehearsal for death when you have an operation and you go into anesthesia? Because where do you go? I don't know. I wasn't conscious of dreaming or anything. I just had the anesthesia, and then at a certain point, I just woke up. Because what did I wake up to? I woke up to a nurse in the operating recovery room who told me that she couldn't vote for Biden because he was a child molester. I don't know how that happened, but reality. Yeah, no, death is political. I would have to disagree with you on that, my friend. In any event, the unpredictability of it all, the uncertainty, especially in times like this. I mean, it's affected us all. It certainly affected the music. Thankfully, we have YouTube, and we have the internet to communicate. There's a lot of really cool live streaming music, but it's all over the place. How do we find it? We know that Smalls is there. Jazz at Lincoln Center. Some of these other institutions do it on a regular basis. Jazz Forum, Mark Morganelli's club is doing stuff on a regular basis. Be nice if there was like a listing service, a TV guide of sorts for all of the live streaming music that's happening during the pandemic here and afterwards. And of course, we wonder, how are some of these jazz clubs going to survive? New York landlords are not known to be humanitarians. But we certainly need the music. Certainly for me, this music, which has served as the backdrop for my entire life, helps me during these times of uncertainty. I mean, back in January, I was into a really good groove. I was working on a film about anti-Semitism. And all of a sudden, boom. Now, in terms of that film, last week, one of the Holocaust survivors that I was working with, a man named Walter Feiger, who was 82 years old, survived concentration camps, passed away, left us. And elsewhere, you can find some of the documentation I've done with him, but I put together a short film about Walter, his life, what he survived. Incredible what some of us survive in this life. Knowing these Holocaust survivors, it's one thing to see the movies and hear, but to sit face to face with them and have them tell their stories, it's just unbelievable what they went through. And in his case, he also had, by people of a word, tsuris, a Yiddish word, meaning trouble. He had a lot of troubles in his life. His wife passed away, a daughter passed away. I mean, this is the life that we have here. Some of it we have some, I don't want to say control, but we try to set things in motion in a certain way. But a lot of it, who the fuck knows? I mean, shit happens. And usually bad shit, not good shit. So I've been thinking a lot about that because we're in Mercury Retrograde and my health thing has been spinning around here. And this show is going through a transformation here. Not really sure where it's going to go here. Wednesday, we've got Dominic Farinacci, a great trumpeter, protege of Wynton Marsalis. Christian Sands, who was supposed to be with us today, will either be on Thursday or Friday. Next Monday, Nicholas Payton, fantastic trumpeter, outspoken guy who's doing a series of live events, as is Dominic, who I mentioned here. Next Wednesday, Steve Proteser and I are doing a show about jazz on film. This is a subject of great interest to me and to Steve as well. Steve is a writer and a producer and a player. So this thing about putting jazz musician stories on film has always been something of interest to me because my early introduction to jazz came in the form of some of these stories, two films in particular. One was The Five Pennies, which featured Louis Armstrong. Another one was the Glenn Miller story, which featured Jimmy Stewart. And of course, seeing Louis Armstrong on the Ed Sullivan Show. But most of these movies around that time, before that and since, about jazz musicians have been ridiculous. They really have been unfair portrayals that don't really tell musician stories, don't tell the story about the joy behind this music and the love of musicians with each other, only the negative aspects of it. So we're going to talk about some good films and some bad films. Let's listen to a little more music here before we close out. A man who's coming up on his 90th birthday this September 7th, Sonny Rollins. Yeah, well, life may be nuts, but the music isn't. Music is one thing you can always count on. That's for sure. It's kind of helped me, inspired me, helped me keep it together. One thing before I go here. There's a lot of people putting up video now, and I have a suggestion. I noticed that a lot of people make the same mistake. I call it the biggest mistake. So I'm going to go out here with a suggestion on how you could correct that. I'll see you on Wednesday. Please stay safe. Keep listening to music. Love each other, and thanks for stopping by. Smartphones have changed the world in many ways. We also use smartphones to produce video, which represents a fantastic opportunity for musicians in particular, who really can't afford to go out and buy expensive video equipment. If you pay attention to lighting, to sound, and to a couple of other things, including composition, which we're going to talk about here in 1 second, you can produce professional quality video using a smartphone. Now, the biggest mistake people make when they produce video for a smartphone is they hold the camera as they would hold it as if they were talking on the phone, and they shoot in what's called portrait mode. That means you're not going to be able to fill the entire screen when you upload your video to YouTube. It looks like this. No, you don't want to do that. Very important to produce professional quality video. People perceive your professionalism, whether or not they like you, whether or not they believe you, based on how you look. And if you're putting up videos in portrait mode, no good. Just simply turn the camera, shoot in landscape mode, and you won't make the biggest mistake.